Viewers, Donald Trump has yet again hailed Prime Minister Modi and the Indian government and hailed the great relationship that he has with India. But in doing so, he also spoke of Pakistan in the same breath. He's yet again repeated that it was Trump who stopped the India-Pakistan war, and also this time repeats that he used trade to stop the India-Pakistan conflict, a claim that has repeatedly been denied by the Indian government. Now, these comments come at a time when Donald Trump is still rather upset about not winning the Nobel Peace Prize for his attempts to play the role of a peacemaker. Is America and the rest of the world buying Trump's narrative? To talk about President Trump's recent statements, the future of ties between India and the United States, as well as the possibility of a trade deal, now as a person who's worked very closely with President Trump in the past, former National Security Advisor of the United States, John Bolton, joins us here on the show. Thank you so much, Mr. Bolton, for speaking to us here at Times Now. And let me begin with the entire narrative surrounding whether Donald Trump will contest a third term. Recently, when asked about it, he said, "I'd love to do it," but also conceded the U.S. Constitution doesn't allow him to do so. Now, given that the Constitution clearly bars any individual from serving more than 2 terms as president, how do you interpret these remarks from him?
Well, this is about as definitive a statement as Trump has made that he cannot run for a third term. There's some argument that because he had 2 terms that were interrupted by President Biden, maybe the limit in the 22nd Amendment is only on consecutive terms. But that's not accurate. When they wrote the 22nd Amendment, they had the example of Grover Cleveland in front of them, another president who had non-consecutive terms. So I think what Trump is doing here is basically telling his followers that he will have a second term and that will be the end of it. Now, I think he has resisted doing that because this confirms he is a lame duck president. But I think he's been getting advice from a number of senior Republican political leaders like Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, who have told him it will damage him if he doesn't concede the obvious that he cannot have a third term.
So the possibility of amending the 22nd Amendment, is that something that you think is completely ruled out? Because even though he has said that he's not allowed to run, it's too bad, what is the possibility that he may go in for those numbers, particularly given the kind of situation that we've seen in the House?
Well, to amend the Constitution, you need a 2/3 majority of the House and the Senate and ratified by 3/4 of the states. That isn't going to happen anywhere near in time to affect the 2028 election. And I think the unspoken point here, of course, is Trump's age as well. He'll be 83 in 2028, and to serve a 4-year term, he'd be 87 when he left. So that at a time when certainly in the Democratic Party, they're talking about getting younger nominees and younger candidates, that would fly in the face of that trend as well.
Right. Now, we've seen President Trump repeatedly claim that it was he who resolved the India-Pakistan conflict. He said that about close to 4 dozen times now. India has constantly denied these claims, though Trump appears to have no regard for what India appears to be saying publicly. Now, is this Trump merely trying to pitch himself as a beacon for world peace and therefore a nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize? The big question is whether he'd want to continue doing that even at the cost of the truth.
Well, I think it is part of Trump's salesmanship to get the Nobel Peace Prize. I think it reveals rather how little he understands about India-Pakistan relations and how that has evolved over time. I mean, I think the chief of the Pakistani military has shown he knows how to get to Trump, promising to nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. Recently in Japan, the new Prime Minister, Sane Takaicha, also offered to nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. So that attracts Trump, but I just don't think he understands enough to know how far off he is when he makes assertions like that. In Malaysia, they just signed another ceasefire between Cambodia and Thailand. Obviously, we all hope that it holds, they resolve their problems, but that's not good enough for a Nobel Peace Prize either, especially since it may break down in the next few months.
Now, interestingly, we've seen Prime Minister Modi, who's not met President Trump, the recent G7 summit in Canada. He's also skipped Sharm el-Sheikh Peace Summit despite an invitation. A junior minister went there. Also the ASEAN, he participated virtually. Is this, and this is coming amidst Trump's criticism of India purchasing Russian oil and imposition of the high tariffs of 50% against us. How do you see India's diplomatic signaling, or is this also a sign of the unpredictability of President Trump?
Well, I thought actually that after they seemed to get over the initial dismay about the extra 25% tariffs because of purchases of Russian oil and gas, that the two sides would move fairly rapidly toward an agreement to eliminate that and also to reduce the base 25% tariffs on economic issues, which hasn't happened. And I think this is very unfortunate. I think we're at a point in time where the U.S.-India relationship on strategic matters is even more important than it has been before. We've had an opportunity now with Prime Minister Albanese of Australia having come to Washington and met Trump for the first time. Trump, as I just said, has just met the new Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi in Tokyo. So to get the Quad moving again, it's high time for Modi and Trump to talk. So I hope that can be arranged. Obviously, Prime Minister Modi's got a huge schedule of his own, but these two need to get together.
All right. Let me also ask you about what Marco Rubio's recent statement says, where he has implemented, because you referred to Asim Munir over there, because Marco Rubio said America's relationship with Pakistan does not come at the expense of its friendship with India. It's something that even U.S. administrations led by Democrats have said in the past. But what do you think are Trump's motivations in making these overtures to Pakistan?
Well, I think Munir has found a way to flatter him, and that's he hasn't really encountered, hasn't had much dealing with Pakistani leaders before. I do remember a number of calls from the first term when I was National Security Advisor that he had with Imran Khan, who was then the civilian leader of Pakistan, on a number of issues primarily related to Afghanistan. But I don't think Trump knows much about Pakistan, and it's sort of a new thing for him, and maybe that's what attracts him. But fundamentally, what needs to guide Washington is the strategic importance of the bilateral relationship with India. And I think what Rubio is trying to say is to make clear that the delinkage between the U.S. relationship with India and the U.S. relationship with Pakistan still obtains, and therefore both parties are free in New Delhi and Washington to concentrate on that.
Right. And because many are looking at the very fact that you're looking at the army chief visiting the White House, there have been multiple visits over the past few months. The big question now is that it appears that Washington is engaging more with Pakistan's military leadership rather than its elected representatives, especially when there are reports coming in from Pakistan itself of the growing dissent against the army chief, who has arrived in Washington, for instance, carrying proposals linked to rare earth minerals. So people are not able to wrap their heads around what exactly is going on.
Well, that would include a lot of people in Washington too. So I do think the rare earth issue is important. We've seen evidence of that on Trump's ongoing trip in Asia, and especially with Imran Khan still in jail in Pakistan, it signals, I think, Trump's not really fully understanding the internal political dynamic in Pakistan either. My view is that it's more evidence of Trump's inability to focus on more than one issue at a time. And I just reiterate my main point, which is that the number of issues that now exist between the U.S. and India are significant, and they are in the way of a closer strategic relationship. We've got to get these economic issues resolved. Coming back to the Russian oil and gas thing, Trump has now put significant new sanctions on 2 Russian companies. That's going to make it much harder for them to sell internationally. And as I believe for some time, I think what the U.S. should do is something similar to what it did when it reimposed sanctions on Iran after getting out of the 2015 nuclear deal, which is help India and other countries that have been relying on Russian oil to transition away from it, so that they're not adversely affected by having to adjust to market price differentials. And I think that's something in cooperation with the Gulf Arab states we should be able to do.
Yeah, but on some level or the other, you also see the hypocrisy in what he's trying to say, because while he repeatedly comes out and says that, India is not going to buy Russian oil, the point is that both the EU as well as China do buy a significant amount of Russian oil, as does the United States in terms of not just oil, but engaging with nuclear and uranium, for instance, and other materials. The question that many are asking is that isn't this double standards then that the U.S. is practicing?
Well, the U.S. trade with Russia is infinitesimal compared to what it was before the invasion of Ukraine. I'd be happy to see it go to zero until that's rectified, but in total dollar terms, it's really quite small. I think a part of the blame here for the sanctions issue is the way the U.S. and the European Union originally wrote the Russia sanctions to allow trade in oil before what was then a price cap, I think, of $60 a barrel. I think it was a mistake. I think our focus should have been simply on taking Russian oil off the market and worrying about the effect on consumer prices in our countries through a different mechanism. So I think now we're beginning to get past that. The Europeans have imposed new sanctions as well. This is something we ought to be doing together. This aggression against Ukraine affects all of us. And those that, for whatever reason, were buying Russian oil and gas, in adjusting to the new circumstances, again, I'd say the U.S. and Europe and the Middle Eastern oil-producing countries should get together and figure out a glide path to smooth this transition.
Right. Mr. Bolton, in this context of the tariffs that we're discussing as far as India is concerned, there's an interesting development where the U.S. Senate has passed a bill to terminate tariffs against Brazil. Would you see this move by Republican-led Senate as a major setback for President Trump, especially since 5 Republicans have joined hands with Democrats on this? Does it indicate growing discontent and division within the Republican camp?
Well, I was very glad to see this vote happen. It's long overdue. There are other signs that Republicans are beginning to break with the Trump administration on things having to do with farmers and ranchers in the United States and a number of other issues. I do think there's some difficulty in getting this Brazil measure through the House of Representatives, which is not in session. Our government, large parts of it are technically closed now because House and Senate can't agree with the president on a budget. That needs to be resolved. But I do think having 5 Republican senators publicly vote against the president is a sign that a lot of Republicans, indeed, I'd say a clear majority, still side with Ronald Reagan, who didn't believe that tariffs were the right economic policy for the United States. I'm very encouraged by it. It's overdue, but it's a good first step.
Right, because many here in India wonder why such a bill cannot be passed as far as India and the tariffs on India are concerned.
Yeah, look, I think Trump's own actions singled out India unfairly. The issue on Brazil had gotten started beforehand, but with this precedent, I think it's now appropriate for senators to consider getting tariff relief on many of the other examples of inequity in what Trump has done. And remember, next week on November the 5th, the Supreme Court will hear arguments on a very strong constitutional challenge to the tariffs themselves. So everybody will be watching that decision as well. But what we need is for Congress to assert itself. It has the taxing power under our Constitution, not the president.
Let me also draw your attention to the Middle East, Mr. Bolton, because President Trump had celebrated the Gaza ceasefire as a massive diplomatic breakthrough. But with Israel now launching fresh strikes after Prime Minister Netanyahu ordered what he called a powerful response, quote unquote, do you think that much celebrated ceasefire is on the verge of collapse?
Well, it's not so much the ceasefire as it is the disarming of Hamas, which is the next critical step in the Trump peace plan that I think is in jeopardy. I believe it was a great success to get the remaining Israeli hostages released, but there's going to be no progress toward lasting peace and stability in Gaza or the Middle East as a whole until Hamas complies with the demilitarization provisions of the plan. And as of now, they haven't shown any inclination to do it. They're reconsolidating their control in about the 45% of the Gaza Strip not controlled by the Israelis. every indication is they're in it for the long term. So it's not just the ceasefire that's in jeopardy, it's the entire rest of the plan.
Okay. And a number of foreign policy challenges that we've discussed over the last few minutes. Now, there's, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war that he's not been able to resolve. There's also the larger issue of Indian tariffs, where India has been resisting pressure as far as buying Russian oil is concerned. He's just exited from the ASEAN summit and is also expected to hold a high-stakes meeting with Chinese Premier Xi Jinping. He's been blowing hot and cold on China, which has a considerable amount of influence. How do you think he'll approach trade with China as opposed to India?
Well, in the signaling before the Trump meeting with Xi, they're looking very optimistic. I think they're going to try and announce a deal where China will increase its purchases of American agricultural products and also crack down on fentanyl production. All I can say is I've been there before. We did this in 2018 where they agreed to clamp down on fentanyl production. All they did was ship it to Mexico, probably reduce their cost of production by doing it over there and reducing transportation costs into the U.S. China has repeatedly promised over decades to pick up their purchases of American farm products, which they do temporarily, and then they go in the other direction. This is not a basis for real change in China's very aggressive and unfair international trade policies. I hope Trump realizes it. I think the other issue on the agenda for the meeting is Taiwan, where China looks poised to press for some concession by the United States. For example, publicly opposing Taiwanese independence. I think that would be a mistake if Trump agrees to that. They say from the White House that won't happen, but I think it's very important, given China's belligerent behavior toward Taiwan recently, to see what comes out of this meeting between Trump and Xi.
Right. And do you expect any major breakthrough on other issues such as rare earth minerals, tariffs, or the Russia-Ukraine war during this meeting with Xi Jinping?
I don't expect other breakthroughs. I think Trump, as always, will say we've got a great framework agreement that consists of 25 words on each side with their subordinates to fill in the blanks. I mean, I think they're both looking for the ability to declare a successful meeting, maybe reflecting a kind of truce in the trade war and other disagreements, but I don't think it'll mark a fundamental change.
Right. I would like to ask you a question as far as domestic politics in the United States is concerned. There's one mayoral election that's taking place in New York that has elicited a lot of interest here in India, particularly because of Zohran Mamdani and his parentage. He's, of course, being viewed as a strong contender against Andrew Cuomo. Do you think that his potential victory could have far-reaching implications, or is this more symbolic, something that is only limited to New York, that has just attracted a lot of attention?
Well, most Americans consider New York a kind of strange place, and its politics are very hard to explain outside. New York Mamdani won the Democratic nomination against a series of weak opponents, including Andrew Cuomo. It looks like he will win next week, the mayoralty. Whether that is going to extend beyond New York, we don't know. There are elections for governor in New Jersey and Virginia where more moderate Democrats are expected to win. So I think what it tells us is there will be a great struggle within the Democratic Party to see whether they remain responsible and centrist, or whether the left wing of the Democratic Party, represented by Mamdani, takes them over the left edge of the political cliff.
All right. We'll have to see how that election really pans out. But thank you so much, Mr. Bolton, for joining us here on Times Now and sharing with us your views.
Thanks for having me.
The News Hour at 10.